If you've ever been confused by the model designations that Audi are using, this is the video that's going to clear up all of that confusion. So Audi have started using a numbering system on their engines. I'll say they've been doing this for some time, and thankfully they've dropped this ridiculous system. But if you were just wondering what these numbers actually mean and just need a little bit of context and explanation as to the thinking behind them, then this is definitely the video for you to check out. The numbers describe the power levels in each model, and they range from 25 to 60. Other manufacturers use things like eco, standard or executive, and sport. And basically, if you buy an eco model, you know it's going to be rubbish to drive but really cheap to run. And if you get a sport model, you know it's going to be expensive to drive but you're going to have a lot more fun with it. So over the years, the badges on the back of cars have become more complex. We've got the Volkswagen Passat 2.0 TDI Blue Motion Technology Executive Style DSG, and you wonder if they actually had to make the models bigger to fit all of that on the back. It wasn't just Audi and the Volkswagen Group that were doing this. Other manufacturers were also coming up with these extremely complex names for their cars. There's the Mercedes-Benz ALG 63 S 4MATIC Plus Coupe Night Edition Plus. So you can see things were getting rather ridiculous. So Audi have come along and they've simplified this just by chucking what is essentially an arbitrary number on the back of the car. So when you buy a car from a German manufacturer, instead of a horsepower figure, they will often quote a PS figure. If you've ever wondered what that is, it's actually the German word Pferdestärke, which means horse strength. But it seems that the horses in Germany are slightly stronger than we've got over here, because 1 PS is equal to 0.98623 horsepower. But roughly you can take the PS figure as an indication of the horsepower figure, and if it's a typical model of about 200 horsepower, you won't be too far out. So the numbers that Audi put on the back of the car, you've got 25, which basically means eco, very, very cheap to run, but rubbish to drive. You won't get very much performance out of this. And power figures on those are typically from around 109 horsepower, 110 PS. The 30 models start at 115 horsepower. The 35 models start to get interesting. You've got 148 horsepower, 150 PS. The 40 is 189 horsepower. The 45 is 282 horsepower upwards. The Audi TT, for example, comes along, and the 45 edition of that was boasting 245 horsepower. The 50 badge starts at about 285 horsepower and goes up. The 55 is 335 horsepower and up. And the 60, I've seen some quote that as being over 400 and others quote it as being 455. So if you know for sure where that power figure starts, let me know in the comments. If you're enjoying the video, please just boot that like button. That really does help us to get out there. So if you can think of a longer badge name than the ones that I've managed to come up with, please type them in the comments. I'd love to see if we can find the longest badge name that you get. And it has to be a badge that is actually on the back of a car. I know things went a bit crazy in the 80s and 90s with regard to car names. So already we're building up a picture that these numbers just really mean a range, and it's a power figure that it starts at. So why didn't they just put a power figure on the back of the car? The problem we've got is that the figures are very, very slightly squished and altered, because a lot of these power figures are derived from the electric assistance that you get from the electric power as well as the engine, and that's not available all the time. If the battery is depleted, you're just running on the conventional engine. You won't be getting the higher level of power. So the manufacturer really can't claim that it's a 200 horsepower model if it's 150 horsepower most of the time, but some of the time you get 200 horsepower. And if they said 150 horsepower, you're going to be disappointed. You're not going to find that as attractive. So they've tried to disguise this with this arbitrary numbering system. So we just take the A3 model range as an example. Now it does vary from model range to model range. So the things you get on the Q5, the Q7 will be completely different from that of the A3. But the A3 is probably one of the most popular Audis for sale over here. So we just look at that numbering system and how it applies to the Audi A3. So you start off with the 25, which is essentially a 1 litre 3-cylinder engine. You know why they didn't want to put that on the back of the car, because who's going to want to buy a 3-cylinder 1 litre engine? It's just not got the credibility there. Although they've extracted a decent amount of power from that, you'll still get about 109 horsepower from that little engine. Then moving up to the 35, you've still got the same 1 litre 3-cylinder engine, but power has been tweaked to about 115 horsepower, 116 PS. So there's actually not a lot of difference between the 30 and the 35, and having driven them, they're not actually that much fun to drive. They're really the eco option. The 35 uses the 1.5 TFSi engine, so that will output 150 horsepower. It's a turbocharged engine. It uses the Atkinson cycle, and it's quite an interesting engine. I don't think I've done a video yet on that, so there will be a video coming out very soon on this 1.5 TFSi engine. It's slightly different to the 1.4 that I've got in my car, and it's certainly fun to drive. You've got a decent power delivery from that, and they're fitting that to quite a few models. But the electric assistance models don't get the 1.5. They drop back down to the 1.4, which is interesting. So we've got the 30 TDI, which we should mention at this point as well. That outputs 115 horsepower, 116 PS roughly, and that's a 2 litre diesel engine. Then we've got the A340. So if it's a TDI, it's got the 2 litre diesel engine, and it's outputting 200 horsepower from that engine. If it's petrol though, it's got the 1.4 litre engine, but it's also got electrical power. So with those combined, you're looking at a shade over 200 horsepower. It's about 204 PS, but the base 1.4 engine is only putting out 150 horsepower. The electric power is where you get the extra power to take it up to the 200 horsepower level. You go to the A6, the 45 TDI, for example, and that uses a 3 litre V6 turbo diesel engine. The A6 and the A7, the 55, has the 3 litre V6 petrol or gasoline engine in those. So you can see it's actually quite confusing. In trying to simplify it, they've oversimplified it, and because they've just picked a random range of numbers that don't really bear much semblance to one another, they've just confused everyone and muddied the waters. So thankfully they are dropping this ridiculous naming convention, but if you're buying a car from the last few years, you're kind of stuck with it. You've got to understand what these different power figures actually mean, and don't get caught out. It's very easy to buy, say, a 40 and forget to notice that you need the 40E. Without that little E, you're stuck with a slightly lower power version. You need the 40E to get the full 200 plus horsepower from the engine. So basically, the lower the number, the more rubbish the car is in terms of performance, but the better it is in terms of economy. And there's even some exceptions to that argument as well. Some of the higher powered engines are actually surprisingly economical, particularly with the electrical assistance. Some of these A3 models are quoting over 240 miles to the gallon when you've got the plug-in hybrid option. So I hope you found this video useful. Please boot the like button. That really does help us to get out there. And I've lined this video up for you that will help you get the best out of your car. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. That does help us out. The more subscribers we get, the bigger the channel actually gets, and the more exposure we get from the algorithm. So you'd be really helping us out. But for now, I'll see you in this video that I've lined up for you. Thanks for watching.